I think I may have burned up the second Yuminashi piston that we just installed. Very sad day for me. This is the third piston that I think I've trashed. I think it has to do with the fueling, and I need to get an upgraded fuel injector. I'll kind of go through a shortcut that I'm planning on trying to see if I don't have to remove all of the coverings and other farkles that I have on the bike. I'm going to start by removing this panel here. There's a little push pin and screw back here, and then it just pops out. I'm then going to loosen up the muffler bolts and then remove the two exhaust port bolts there that hold the exhaust to the top end. After that, obviously remove the spark plug wire. Back over here, there's a couple of catches for the O2 sensor that I can release, maybe give myself enough room. I'm then going to remove the two bolts for the throttle body, lift that off of the thing, and then take off the timing chain, etc. And hopefully that will give me enough room to kind of squeeze in here and get to the piston. I'm just going to replace the piston this time, not the cylinder. And there's also this under plastic bit here, which has 4 little poppets. And I'll try to get that off, give myself just a little bit more room when I do the fuel injector change later. So we'll go through this, we'll get into the engine, take a look at that piston. Using a 17mm socket, I'm going to go ahead and remove the drain bolt. Here it comes, taking off the final bit by hand here. All right, here comes the oil. This is fresh oil again. Let that drain out. While that's draining, we're going to go ahead and start getting the exhaust system down a little bit to see if we've got enough clearance to remove the cylinder head and the cylinder. This piece here has a screw back here that you can feel. That's a Phillips head screw, and then you've got a poppet directly under here, which again you can feel for. And what I like using is the end of a Dremel tool to actually push the center of those poppets, and then you can remove them very, very easily. Right up here on that plastic piece, there are 2 tabs here and over here, and unfortunately those are both broken on mine. I actually was able to remove it the first time without breaking any tabs and put it on without breaking any tabs, but somewhere during my riding, one of the tabs broke and then the other tab on the next thing broke. So not sure what happened there, but I would expect those are the only tabs on this entire bike that have broken. So if you're able to retain them, great. Otherwise, you're gonna be like me. Using a 12mm wrench to undo or loosen the top exhaust mount screw, and then this bottom screw down here, I'm just going to go ahead and take that out. Next, I'm going to use the box end of this wrench to get to these exhaust manifold nuts. This near side nut is giving me a little bit of trouble trying to get around this crash bar. So I'm going to go ahead and take the guard off of the cylinder for the oil temperature sensor. Nice thing is it has to come off anyway. That requires an 8mm wrench, which I've got right here. Taking off that oil temperature sensor guard gave me enough room, just enough, to get that nut off, and then you can see the exhaust manifold pipe. Just enough clearance, so I should be able to get that cylinder head off, no problem. It's a little tight squeeze. All right, got those. Now I'm going to remove the little black cover here, removing the 4 poppets. Next, disconnecting the oil temperature sensor plug. And then I'm gonna go over here, remove the spark plug wire, and then I'm gonna go ahead and take a 10mm open-ended wrench. Actually, I'm going to use the closed end of that wrench, and I'm going to get these guys to unscrew and lift the throttle body. It's a pretty tight squeeze under here, but if you use this wrench with the curved part down, you can just get on top of that bolt and undo it. So that's what I'm gonna do right now. Now I have the big throttle body kit set up, so I don't have the throttle guard that is on the stock system. But anyway, what I'm doing here is I'm gonna lift up and I'm gonna pull out this little gasket. Once that gasket's out, then I can work on getting the cylinder head off. The next steps are to remove the timing hole cover and the crankshaft hole cover. Then I'll remove this timing sprocket cover and remove the timing sprocket gear. This timing sprocket cover requires an 8mm socket to pull those bolts off, and then you just kind of wiggle it from the top and the bottom until you get that removed. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use my breaker bar here onto the crankshaft hole. I'm gonna rotate counterclockwise until we're at top dead center. You know you're at top dead center when you're looking at your timing hole, and you can see the little tick mark lined up with the dot. Then come over here and you can see the little mound on the aluminum part here and the 0 are lined up to each other. The setup I'm going to use in order to break the sprocket nut off, or bolt off. You can see I've got a 12mm socket on the end of the nut, and I've got my breaker bar holding the crankshaft in place. I've now loosened that bolt. It is a call your friend moment because you have to hold this with your leg while you use your hands to get this guy out. Now before I take the timing sprocket off, I'm gonna loosen a little bolt down here. Let's see if I can find him. He's right here, okay? He's the one that has the copper washer. It's my understanding that this is the bolt which tensions the chain that you see around now, the timing chain, and this will release the tension. So I'm gonna back that off almost all the way, not take it out fully, and then I'm gonna go ahead and pull the sprocket off, and then we can start on the head bolts themselves. There, I backed it off. It required a 10mm socket. I'm gonna first remove these two 8mm socket head bolts, followed by these 4 12mm socket head bolts. That should free up the cylinder head. And when you take these nuts off, make sure you go and loosen them slightly, each of them in turn. Go back and forth. That way you don't do any distortion of this head. Also, generally you would have loosened this nut here, which holds a little roller for the timing chain, and probably have removed the oil temperature sensor from the cylinder body. But since I'm not replacing the cylinder body and I think I've got enough room, I'm just gonna leave those attached. I'm now ready to move this cylinder head forward. One last thing before I do that. This little wire, remember for the O2 sensor, I need to pop that out so that it gives me a little bit of slack like that. Hopefully that gives me enough. If not, I might have to disconnect it. We'll see. I'm gonna make the attempt to not pull the cylinder head all the way off. All right. There we go. Okay. So I see my first problem with this whole idea, and that is that this bash guard just might be in the way. I'll play with it a little bit. Maybe I can loosen these out. In fact, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna loosen the front two and the back two without pulling them out. They're kind of a pain to get in. And that should give me just enough clearance to get this stud for the exhaust port to get by this bash plate. That freed it up nicely. So very gently, I don't want to pull this all the way off. I'll go ahead and slide it enough forward. Probably get it right to the threads where I feel comfortable. Right about there. It's gonna give me lots of room to work back here on the cylinder. All right, and we're starting to see this piston here. Can't really tell a whole lot just yet. I'll pull the cylinder forward, drop the piston out. Wanted to take a look to make sure that everything looks good with the spark plug. You can see it's pretty oily. But overall, that looks okay. Looking at the valves, I don't see any problem. I don't see any chunks of anything up there. That's a real good sign. Here's the piston starting to emerge from the bottom of the cylinder. I'll be really careful to not let that fall. So I'll put 2 hands on it and drop it on out. I use a set of really nice needle nose pliers, and I'm gonna go right down in this groove. Hopefully you can see that. Hold on. Right there, and I'm gonna grab that wrist pin circlip. I'm just gonna pull that out. And I may wind up rotating the engine counterclockwise a little bit to withdraw this piston a little bit further back here when installing the new one, just to give me a little bit of extra clearance. Just reminding to get it back to the correct timing using the little mark inside of that timing hole at the appropriate time. So I like using the end of a ballpoint pen, nice and soft, doesn't damage anything, to go ahead and push the wrist pin out so it disconnects the piston from the connecting rod. All right, let's take a look at this piston, see what happened. So looking at the exhaust side, you can see quite a bit of scraping. And when you come around over to the intake side, you can see quite a bit more damage. This is definitely melting. You can see some pitting. You can see that the diameter has been reduced. It's pretty ugly right there. You can see chunks of the piston are starting to erode away. The little pieces of aluminum are getting caught in the oil scraper ring. That's the bottom ring. And certainly between the number 1 and number 2 rings. So yeah, this is just the beginning stages. Note, I was able to restart the bike, and if you give it enough throttle, you keep going for a little while. But obviously you're losing compression through that area. And of course, I'll go back to my original catastrophic failed piston. Take a look at that, just for comparison. This is what the end stage of such a failure looks like. Right, you can see an enormous amount of melted material. Same location, it's on the intake side. I'm guessing for whatever reason that's where your combustion is occurring, a little hotter than the rest of it. Usually it'd be exhaust side, but almost the exact same location. You can see it right in front of that exhaust or intake port. And same thing with this new piston. You've got, you know, your damage occurring mostly right in that same area. Right. So consistent failure, that's good. It means that gapping my piston rings last time probably didn't have too much of an effect since these ones went in just factory stock. And yeah, so I'll again, all 3 pistons, the Takagawa 143 and the 2 164cc pistons, all failed in the same parameters. In other words, between 60 and 70 miles per hour, wide open throttle for a period of time. I think I'm just running lean at that top end. I think the stock fuel injector is not enough, and we'll be upgrading that to a Takagawa G1 fuel injector, which is supposed to be suitable for 181cc with an air filter kit installed with the sport exhaust, big bore, and obviously the bigger piston cylinder. So I'll guide you through the fuel injector install, put this all back together, and give an update once that's all done and up and operational. And then we'll see if this piston lasts longer than 100 miles or 200 miles, then I think I'm going in the right direction. If not, well, you know, rinse and repeat. That's part of the fun of having a hobby like little motorcycles. Easy to work with. This total in time, probably 30 minutes or less for me to do it. Took me a little longer because of the videoing. If you enjoyed this type of content, please like and subscribe. And yeah, just waiting for those 2 parts to come back in. A fuel injector, which I'll install right here to replace the original one, and a new piston from Yuminashi, 60 millimeters in diameter, and all things will be good. Fresh oil change, we'll lock it up. Thanks for watching.